Today we're talking about two finishes for your wood, shellac and lacquer. One is all natural, the other is highly toxic. One dries very rapidly, the other not as much. One of them stands up much better to heat, to liquid, the other not so much. Which one's better for your project? Stay tuned and we'll tell you all about it. If you like what you see, please hit the like button, subscribe so you can get future content from us. Let's dive in.
Hi, today we're going to take a look at two finishes which may or may not be familiar to you, but as you do your projects and finish them, you might want to consider these two. And so we'll compare and contrast them today and take a look at the similarities and the differences and the characteristics that might be important to you. From a historical perspective, this is shellac, and this is a de-waxed shellac, and it's in its fairly natural form, which you can see is flakes here. The way shellac is manufactured, it is a byproduct of a bug, a Southeast Asia bug called the lac bug, which lives on trees in that area, and it secretes a substance on the branches. That substance is then harvested and melted down and sent through strainers, and then it's dried out and it produces a flat surface, which they then crack into these flakes, and they package it, and this is a pound of shellac flakes. The solvent for shellac is denatured alcohol. Denatured alcohol is the regular kind of alcohol you find in vodka or whatever, but it's, quote, denatured, which means they've put a poison in it so that you can't drink it. But it's very inexpensive, it's very easy to obtain, and it is not an obnoxious chemical to use. So you dissolve these flakes in certain proportions in the denatured alcohol, and then you brush that on to give you the finish. This shellac is an old finish. When fine furniture was made a long time ago, starting in about 1820, shellac was discovered, and this was the go-to finish for fine furniture for 100 years, starting in 1820. Then, after World War I, or during World War I, nitrocellulose lacquer was invented, discovered, crafted by chemists, and it makes a very good finish for furniture. It was especially liked immediately by the furniture industry, first in the United States, and then it spread to Europe. And the thing that is so likable about this from a professional furniture maker's standpoint is how rapidly it dries. So you could put a coat of this on your furniture and have it dry and ready to accept another coat, depending on the atmosphere, the humidity and the temperature. But under nominal circumstances, you could have this ready within a half hour to recoat. So you could put 5 coats of lacquer on in less than 3 hours. Now the professional manufacturers spray this on, and they use spray guns, either an air compressor driven spray gun or an HVLP, which is a low pressure version of that. The idea of with spraying this on is you have to completely atomize it, and by atomize it, that means make it into a very, very fine mist. You don't want to spray droplets of it, you want to spray a mist. That's because it dries very rapidly once it hits the surface. And if you don't get the consistency correctly and your sprayer isn't powerful enough to atomize, then you'll get orange peel finishes and other blemishes in the finish, which are not very attractive. Lacquer, by the way, is oftentimes used on cars as well, and it is sprayed on. And of course, you don't want an orange peel finish on a car, and you really don't want an orange peel finish on your furniture. So which one of these might you want to use for what kind of project? The thing about shellac is it's inexpensive, It mixes with an inexpensive solvent, that being denatured alcohol, and it's easy to consistently mix it. It's easy to store it because it's dry. You don't have to keep it in a can and covered up. And it's fairly easy to put on. You brush it on. The thing you have to learn about lacquer is that you only brush forward. You never brush back and forth like you would with paint or some other finishes. And that's because you can drag partially dried shellac into the wet shellac and sort of mess up the finish. So, but that's not that hard to get used to, and so it's fairly easy to put on. A downside of shellac is that you can't put something wet or hot on it. So if you have a glass of ice water that's sweating and you put that down, within a couple of minutes you'll have a white ring, and that's a white ring that you can't get out. Also true with shellac is that heat will damage the surface and permanently damage the surface. So you have to use hot pads if you're going to set something even warm onto shellac. Now, lacquer is sprayed on generally by the professionals. If you were to try to spray it on at home, you would have to have some fairly expensive spray equipment in the several $100 range for an HVLP sprayer. But once you have that sprayer, the lacquer itself is not terribly expensive per ounce. Another alternative to spray it on is to buy cans of lacquer at the big box home store, and you can spray it on like any spray paint. You have to be a little bit careful about keeping a wet edge because it dries very quickly, whether you spray it on or however you put it on, but you can get that sprayed finish using cans. The problem with that is per ounce that makes the lacquer pretty expensive. This particular can of lacquer is a brushing lacquer, which has a solvent in it to slow down the drying process a little bit, and so you can brush it on. The problem with brushing, two problems with brushing on lacquer: it can leave brush marks because it dries so quickly. It doesn't have time to have the surface level out, so you need to use a very fine brush, and you need to use a very light stroke on the lacquer. The other problem with brushing lacquer on is that you have to keep a wet edge. If it dries before you come back with the next round of lacquer, that is the next part of the surface that you're covering, it will leave a mark. So you have to keep a wet edge. If you were try to brush lacquer on a surface, say even the size of the top of this table saw, that would be a very difficult, if not impossible, prospect, depending on how hot it is and how dry it is, because it would dry so quickly that by the time you brush from the top to the bottom and then come back to the top, this surface up here will likely have dried. So you can brush it on, but you need to brush it on smaller surfaces. Lacquer is somewhat more resistant to being marred by heat and water, but it still is not great. If you're doing furniture that has to stand up to heat and water, you might consider another finish like polyurethane. And by the way, we have another video content on polyurethane. If you want to go look at that, we'll put that link to that in the notes. So to sum up, this is a very old finish. It's very natural. It uses, it's completely natural. It's not toxic. And the solvent for it is denatured alcohol, which is readily available, not expensive, and not obnoxious to use in terms of how it smells, and it's not particularly damaging to the environment. Lacquer is very quick to put on. It dries very rapidly, so you can put multiple coats on in a short period of time. If you try to brush it on, you've got some issues with the speed of drying and trying to keep a wet edge. And if you spray it on, you need to have a somewhat pricey spraying equipment. The other thing is that this is extremely toxic. The lacquer thinner, which is the solvent, you must wear respiratory equipment to keep you from breathing it at all, and you really don't want to do it in a closed room. It's also highly flammable and explosive, so you wouldn't want to use it. You could not use it in a room where there is an open pilot light to a water heater or a furnace, so it can be dangerous. But it is more durable. So thank you for watching the video. If you like it, please hit the like button, and we suggest that you hit the subscribe button as well, and then you'll be notified of future videos that we do.